All right, let's get started. Okay, today's date is 29 November 2023. I am in Virginia, and I've got the pleasure of speaking with Cheryl Molinet. Thank you, Cheryl, for sitting down and talking to us.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity,
Yeah,
and it gives me a pleasure to have served my country for this.
yeah. Where are you located right now?
I'm in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Okay, great, great. All right. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up, go to school, that kind of thing?
Well, I was born in Evansville, Indiana. My parents are Mary and Joe Molinet. My dad was in the Navy during World War II. My mother was in the Navy as a wave during World War II. Um, Went to Bosse High School uh, in my high school period, and then decided to go into the Navy.
And was that a decision you made because your dad was in the Navy?
Actually, it was a decision for threefold reasons. My grandfather
Okay.
served in World War I on the USS Olympia, which caught fire. So I had always listened to his stories about that. And
Right.
then, like I said, my dad was in World War II and my mother in World War II as a wave. Um, and so I was sitting in class in college one day and got this intuitive thing float through my head that said, I'm not supposed to be here. I should be somewhere else. And I said, I know where that is. And I went to the Navy recruiter the next day, took the paperwork to my mother. She signed it. And 3 weeks later, off I went to boot camp in Bainbridge, Maryland.
Wow. And what year was that?
That was in January 72.
Okay. Okay. And you knew what you wanted to do in the Navy?
I did not. I just knew that I wanted to serve my country like my family did. It seemed to be a family tradition to me, and I wanted to follow suit with that um, because I was, especially during that particular time, each of my relatives served during a war. We were in the midst of Vietnam, and I felt this is my calling again. I need to serve like my family did. Um, I had no idea what I would be. I just needed to get there and be whatever came about. So boot camp was
Gotcha.
an eye opener, though it wasn't tough. And eventually I figured out what I was going to be in the Navy.
And what was that?
That was, well, it was a personnelman. Personnelmen are no longer in the Navy. I don't know what they're called. Personnelmen took care of enlisted service records. We also typed up orders, transfer orders to go somewhere. We took care of their entire folder record while they were in the military if they were stationed at our command. So I
Okay.
started as an E1 and ended up being a PN1. So that's an
Okay.
E6.
E6. Okay. Did you make a career out of the Navy?
I wanted to, but I was injured in boot camp. Um, so in the late 70s, when they decided women needed to go aboard ship, I was not able to because of my injury. So I had a disability discharge, unfortunately, but everything turned out
Okay.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So where were you stationed? What were some of the places you served?
Well, primarily in Norfolk, Virginia, at Naval Station Norfolk, the 72 through 73. I went to PN school during that time frame, and then I was sent to Sinclair Fleet for the remainder of my time, which would have been 78. And then I went to Japan for the rest of those times, and I got out in 81. So I was in 72 to 81, January.
Okay. Okay. What? So you talked about PN. What is that?
Personnelman, all it is um, it's like, when you go into your doctor's office, you have the clerk that takes out your file and makes sure everything is in order and makes sure the notes from the doctor are in there. That's pretty much what a personnelman did. It's your entire history while being in the military. So we used to coordinate with the dispersing clerks for pay, because that would entail taking your leave papers, making sure the dispersing clerk got that, so you could be allotted
Right.
and accounted for your leave time. So it was really your personal file, your personal history of being in the military, and then typing up whatever needed to be put in there. Say your personal information. If you got married, if there was a death in the family, you needed to change that on your personal information. We did all of that kind of typing and keeping of the record.
I see. I see. Okay. Um, what were some of the challenges that you faced?
Typing. I wasn't an avid typist when I went in, but going to PN school in Florida, we had to pass a typing test. And by the grace of whoever's watching over me, I passed it and became pretty proficient in typing after that. Uh, the Navy itself became sort of my second nature. I had no problems being in the Navy. Um, Taking care of people seemed to be a thing that I liked doing. So taking care of their service records, excuse me, followed suit. I didn't have a lot of challenges really for me
Right.
personally.
Right. You were dealing, I assume, with the troops that were heading over to Vietnam, coming back
Yeah,
from Vietnam, things like that.
I did. Before I was a personnelman, I was working toward finding what my calling was in the Navy. I was stationed at Norfolk's transfer and receiving office. Um,
Okay.
that was in late 72 through 73. Um, and I started having contacts with young men, could have been Marines, it could have been the Navy, going over to the area. Um, and it struck me as being, this is the reason why I wanted to be here. Because, first off, this was the war that I was supposed to be serving in. So
Right.
I would have interactions with them. And then I realized I may be the last female they see, I may be the last person in the States that they see. So I always tried to keep pleasant, um, and wish them well. And the last thing before they walked out the door, I was saying to them, I hope I see you back here when you return. Um, that put that put I'm getting a little emotional here, so sorry. That put a little thought in my mind. It's like, this is why I joined. So I went to my first class, PN1 Alexander, and I said, I want to go to Vietnam. So I put a chit in. And I remember him looking at me and saying, I can't approve this. You won't return. And I didn't know for quite a while what he meant. So I said, I'm going to do this again. I feel this is where I'm supposed to be. This time stating, I'll become a nurse if I have to. I want to go there. And again, he said, no, I can't sign this. You won't return. So much later on, especially upon the return of the POWs and seeing some of the men come back from Vietnam, I realized what he was talking about. The
Right.
not returning would have been mentally and or physically. So I have to give him that he was looking out for me, but I was still able to serve during that era to those that were going over into the war. So
Right.
I felt okay with that. That's all I could do. That's what I was going to do the best of my ability.
Right. Right. What was the mindset of the guys going over there? Um, were,
Some
were,
of them,
were they dreading it?
some were. Of course, we had AWOLs that we got back in. They were caught before they got wherever they were going to escape to. And it was sad to see that because they did not want to go. They didn't want to lose their life. But then I had the other ones that were going out and they were like happy to serve their country, even though this was a war that nobody wanted and kept saying,
Yeah.
we don't need to be there. They were willing to go. Some of them had volunteered versus being drafted in. So it was like more I'm happy to serve my country rather than those that came back AWOL.
Right, right. You know, I've a lot of the troops that I talked to, I asked them, you know, what was it like being over there, knowing what was going on here with the protesting and the anti-war stuff, the sentiment that the country had. Um, a lot of them, they didn't really know because they were over there doing their thing and they weren't paying attention to it. But you were actually here in the States,
Right.
so you were probably privy to a lot of that was going on. I guess you couldn't even really miss it.
No,
Miss
it,
what was
it,
going on because you saw it in the news all the time. How did that affect you, and how did you see it affecting the troops that were heading over there?
well, I'll go back a little bit to when I left boot camp. And at that time, we could not leave. We could not go anywhere without being in uniform. So after boot camp, I came home for a short period of time. And I decided, I'm a little bit of a rebel also. So I decided I'm going to go to the mall, and I know I have to be in uniform, but I just want to experience this. And I experienced what was happening, the terrible calls, the uh, name calling. I didn't necessarily get spit on, but I saw some that really probably would have preferred that. So that was my first experience after I got to my first duty station. Um, you know, this is a naval base. This entire area, so it wasn't so bad here. But go anywhere
Right,
else and listening to it on the news, it was heartbreaking for me because we had people going over there and dying while people here were living free. And I understand that it was a political thing, but that doesn't take away the fact that we had people, including our nurses, going over there and losing their lives and fighting the best they could for our country, but people weren't supporting them. So when everything was done and said, only then did we start to get support of serving through Vietnam. Only
right,
when the wall went up did people go, oh my gosh, look at those names. For me, I recently went to the 30th anniversary of the Vietnam Women's Memorial. And so that's 30 years ago, they just got acknowledged. The women, the nurses, there were some administrative there from, I believe, the Army. They just got acknowledged for being Vietnam. So now we go there now and we see both of those memorials. People cannot deny what happened, but they also have to recognize, I hope, that those of us that served our country.
right.
And that was what we did with pride and with losing some of our lives, some of our our serenity, the PTSD that occurred to so many. Um, we served. That to me is the bottom line. We served our country.
Right. You mentioned that you had said to some of the troops heading over there that you'll see them when they come back. Did you were you in a position to see some of those guys as they came back, talk to them, hear any of their
Unfortunately,
stories?
no, I wasn't because that's shortly in 70. No, I'll take that back. I did see a couple come back because it wasn't until late 73 that I went to PN school.
Okay.
And some of them they were dazed. I mean, they were happy to be here in one piece, but they were sort of dazed, and they were coming back for a discharge in their hometown.
Right.
So it was
Right.
hard for me to watch that because they were a shell.
No,
I don't know,
noticeably different than when they went.
noticeably, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So eventually you went to PN school. How did that change your duties and what you were doing day to day, or did it?
It really, well, it did because I was, as a personnelman when I came back, I was stationed at Sinkland Fleet.
Okay.
So, of course, that is still the big command where all of the the Supreme Allied Commands are stationed, and their buildings are there. So I was working at the PSD, Personnel Support Detachment. So I was still seeing some come back, but they had been back for a while. But I was still doing the personnel work. It was just more detail, and I had more responsibilities. Now I had to learn how to type up their transfer records, and I had to learn how to bring them back in full capacity for their services, tracking them more with their service records. I was given more responsibility other than handing them their packages at Norfolk and saying, I hope to have a safe flight. I hope you stay safe. I hope to see you back. In Sinkland
Right.
Fleet, it was the full package. I was doing all of it.
Okay. Okay. And from there, you said you'd gone to Japan, correct?
Yes, I went to Japan for 2 years. It was CTF 72 Combat Wing 1. It was a squadron.
Okay.
And we had 4 locations for that particular squadron that I was in charge of. I was the only PN there.
And what was that like? That's got to be different. Culture shock.
Oh, very
Going to
much culture shock.
all the way around the world.
Yeah, it was, but I did enjoy the Japanese. They were very nice, very polite. Um, the command itself was different for me because I was what they called black shoe. The air squadrons are brown shoe. So I was a black shoe coming into a brown shoe. And it was an acclimation period and having to gain their trust because I was not an Airedale. So at CTF 72, I had to manage all of the personnel activities, which included preparing for examinations, monitoring the paperwork going out for discharges. Uh, it was just the full package at CTF 72.
And you said you had a chance to interact with the Japanese.
Oh, yes. I
And
actually
yeah,
lived on the economy for about 8 months. And
okay.
I really enjoyed that. It was nice to know that living in the United States, what we had access to was so different from what the Japanese had access to. So it was an appreciation of what we have, but yet it was nice to see how they acclimated to their own environment. And
Okay.
trying to learn a new language for me was different also.
Right. What are the kind of things you're talking about that they didn't have access to that we do that maybe we take for granted?
Well, they have grocery stores, but most of their stores were at the Ginza, where they had it was open market. That's where you bought your meat products. You bought your produce. They had the little shops that you would go instead of going to the larger ones, say in Tokyo. You would go
Right.
buy some of your clothing there. It's not like going to Walmart or back in the day, ABC store, 7-Eleven. Um, it was a lot different than that. They had propane heat. They had to heat with kerosene. We had furnaces. They might have been coal furnaces, later on electric furnaces, but they were still using these, what we would consider primitive type of tools to cook and heat with. Um, their toilets were different than ours. It was not a nice drainage system. You would go to the park. Here in the United States, you'd go to the park. You would go into the restroom, and you would have facilities in there, running water. The toilet would flush. A lot of times in Japan, you would go into the toilet, and it was just the toilet seat. Sounds funny, but it goes down into a benjo ditch, and the water's running through, and I'm going, oh my goodness, this is different, but there's no other option. So
Right.
that was different. Also, is learning to acclimate to other countries. When I went to Korea on a visit for CTF 72, that was totally a wake up call. Their meat market was out there and they were chopping up the foods. Again, this was back in the late 70s. They were chopping up the foods and people were purchasing them. And all I could see were animal parts hanging from the building area, which was open. And then a lot of flies. And I'm going, oh, different. It took me back several steps. And their water wasn't. In Japan, the water was fine to drink. In Korea, in the Philippines, we weren't supposed to drink the water because the purification of the water was not to our standards. So those things woke me up to being very glad that I actually lived in the United States and appreciated that.
Right. Of all of your assignments, which one do you look back most fondly on, have the best memories of?
Personnel support activity at St. Clair Fleet. I got to see a lot of the admirals. I was around, I was in the midst of who was in charge of the Navy during Vietnam. And being there, and sort of taking part in that as being the personnelman, one of the personnelmen there. Again, it gave me a sense of honor because I was right there. Every once in a while, the Marines would hold a drill, a bombing drill. And when I inquired about it, they're like, don't you realize that we're in a war and we are a bomb target? And I'm like, I didn't want to know that, but thank you for that. Now it puts a different light on things. And I don't think a lot of people realize that some of the bases were bomb targets during Vietnam. And St. Clair Fleet was one of them because that was the command post.
Yeah. Looking back on it, how do you think that your time in the military, how do you think that shaped who you would eventually become as a person?
Oh, I still am that person. But let me back up just a little bit because I was never considered a Vietnam era because I was a female. I didn't serve in country. So it hurt because that was the reason I went in following suit of my family members serving during a war. And then when I got the call from Diane, and I was able to participate in the 30th anniversary, I finally felt acknowledged and accepted as a Vietnam veteran. I did not serve in country, but I served our country during Vietnam. And I served our service members going over there and coming back. So that brought my gratitude back. I've always been a Navy wave. I've always been that and would never not claim to be that. But it makes me even prouder now to know that especially the nurses that were there accepted me. The Vietnam men in country, war veterans accepted me, came up and talked to me after my speech there. That made me extremely proud for serving. And I felt that I had fulfilled my commitment to my family's homage of serving like they did. Yeah. Everything, how I present myself now is still how I was taught to in the military.
Right. Yeah, that never leaves you. The person that you become never leaves you.
It does not. No, you're correct.
Yeah. Someone might watch this some years down the road. What would you like them to know about your service?
I volunteered, as all women volunteered, because we weren't drafted. And we did it to serve our country. Whether we got out at the end of our time or we re-enlisted, we served our country and we served it with pride. We would, everyone that I've talked to would all do it again for the same reason. And being proud of your country and serving your country is not a bad thing. We have to be proud of our country. We have the capacity to vote to change how the country is run, but we have to do that. It's all a personal endeavor. What do you want out of yourself? What do you want out of your country? Are you willing to serve your country to help it get where you want it to be, to where we want it to be, so that we don't become a third world country? So it's about your own ideas of who are you, what are you willing to do? Because when we as female volunteers, and the males, some of the males volunteered also, but when we put our name on that line, we knew that we could lose our life, but yet we signed. So that is commitment, right. Commitment to the service, the branch that we went into, and commitment to our country. Commitment is important.
Right. Absolutely. So I guess my next question would be, what advice would you give somebody? And it sounds like service is one of those things that you would definitely tell someone is important in any capacity, just to serve.
Just to serve, because you learn more about yourself. You learn what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate. You learn what you can change if you choose to. You may be in a situation, but it's how you perceive that situation. Can I change that within me? Can I change how I'm affected by it? Only I can change how I'm affected by something. And if I can, and I go into the service, the benefits that I will get could be I can, as the Navy used to say, see the world, join the Navy.
Right.
I can get my education. I can go to college under the GI Bill. I can have a career. I can serve up to 20 years, and get a nice salary and get a nice retirement from that. And learn more about myself, learn more about yourself by going a little bit out of the bubble, a little bit out of everybody else's ideas of who they want you to be. Think about who you want to be and what you are willing to do, and what you are willing to do to keep our country safe.
Right. Good advice. Is there anything else you'd like to document about your story that we haven't talked about?
Oh my gosh. I could thank so many of my mentors during the Navy. I can't even go through all of their names. I had good supervisors. I had some bad ones. I try to put out of my mind the ones that didn't like women in the Navy. But again, all of us that stayed in there, we persevered. We stayed. We changed the way it affected us. There are people we're going to meet in our life that we may not realize until later, like PN1 Alexander, and I always remember his name. He made such an impression on me. Acknowledging, yes, I wanted to go to Vietnam, but no, he wasn't going to, and this is the reason why. And so later on, realizing that mentor instilled in me the desire to continue doing what I was doing and to serve for the reason I was doing. There are many of those mentors in every branch of the service, and we should have it as a blessing that they are there, and that we can learn more about ourselves.
Right, right. Well, Cheryl, on behalf of the Americans of Wartime Experience, I want to thank you for sitting down and talking to us. I do appreciate you taking some time out of your day. But more importantly, I want to thank you for your service. Yep. And thank you for your service.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. Makes a world of difference to me to hear that.